Okay, hello and welcome to this Institute for Government event on transforming government. I'm Emma Norris, the Deputy Director here at IFG. The Prime Minister has called for nothing less than the complete rewiring of the British state, and the current government sees reform, rightly, of both the public sector and the civil service in particular as crucial to delivering both their agenda and showing that they are serious about change. Now, here at the Institute for Government, we analyse, we propose and we closely follow efforts to transform government. As lots of you in the audience will know, many of the same themes, from breaking down silos to making better use of technology, come round again and again when we're talking about how to improve government. So what does a proper rewiring of the state look like? And perhaps most crucially, how can it be made to stick this time when previous reform efforts have only at least partially succeeded? Now, today we're very lucky to be joined by Jary CBE, who's going to be sharing his thoughts on how to go about transforming government. Michael was previously the government's lead non-executive director. He works very closely with senior ministers, with civil servants, including then Cabinet Secretary Simon Case. And that, combined with his extensive private sector experience, means he has some really fascinating insights into what works and what doesn't, both in Whitehall and beyond. We're lucky to also have a very brilliant panel to talk about the contents of Michael's speech. We've got the Right Honourable Sir Jeremy Quinn, most recently Paymaster General and Minister for the Cabinet Office in the Sunak government. He previously held a number of government roles, including as Minister for Defence Procurement at the MOD. So I'm looking forward to hearing his perspective from a kind of ministerial point of view about what transforming government looks like. We've got JC Kluwer, who has extensive experience in government as well, both as a consultant and also as a special advisor in the Brown government. She's currently a partner at EY, where she leads on people consulting across government, and she sits on DCIT's expert advisory panel on the Digital Centre of Government. And then finally, we're joined by Alex Thomas, a former senior civil servant and current programme director of all things civil service here at IFG, and he led our work on the Commission on the Centre of Government that we launched last year. So just before we get going, this is a reminder to start thinking about questions for everybody in the room. I'll make sure there's lots of time for you to ask them. And for anybody joining us online, you don't need to wait until question time. You can use the Slido function to start submitting your questions now. I'll make sure that I take some from our online audience as well. OK, Michael, I'm going to hand over to you now. Emma. Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon. So I don't think I need to spend a lot of time persuading you that government needs transforming. The public certainly thinks so. 79% say our system of government could be improved a lot. 57% say that they agree with the statement, nothing in Britain works anymore. And this isn't mere frustration, it's a warning. And it's a warning because populists flourish when governments fail to deliver. The great claim of the demagogue is that they can be effective when through their own autocratic power. So we've reached this point despite numerous attempts at reform, from Fulton in 1968 up to Lord Gove and Lord Maud's recent contributions to the oeuvre. And they all follow familiar concerns: widening the talent pool, sharpening performance, using data and technology better, professionalising delivery, clarifying accountability, and yes, even strengthening the role of non-executive directors. All good ideas, all necessary, and yet the same themes keep returning. In response, the organisation seems to have doubled down on itself, adding to the scale of the centre, layering more checking and compliance. The Cabinet Office, for example, has moved in an opposite direction to nearly all corporate centres, reaching 10,000 staff from just 1,300 in 2008. It's important to acknowledge this is not a reflection on the dedication of civil servants. I've come to admire their perseverance and their phlegmatism. But many civil servants share my frustration that these reforms feel like attempts to modernise 20th century government rather than envision a model for the 21st. It always struck me as a bit odd that Dominic Cummings idealises the Manhattan Project and the Apollo programme as the technocratic way forward, but both predate his birth. Any change programme must be more than just a list of improvements. It demands a future-looking goal, a vision. I'd like to offer 3 themes which could lead us to a reimagined government for 2035. First, we must aim not to administer departments, but to solve today's and tomorrow's problems. So the Communities Secretary, when I was at MHCLG, asked me to cast an eye over rough sleeping accommodation, and it became apparent that this was just one part of a complex challenge. It also touched on mental health, substance abuse, integrating migrants, not releasing prisoners on a Friday, supporting veterans, paying benefits in a timely way. To make any headway requires join-up between departments and also with agencies and local authorities and civil society organisations. It was very hard to do and frankly impossible to make stick. And today, the problems we face are wicked problems like these, such as productivity, inequality, net zero, the 9 million not working. They span organisational boundaries and they defy simple policy. In practice, I found myself discussing these type of problems with large meetings of civil servants, but struggling to identify who was empowered, who was responsible. There are endless checkpoints, seeking permission, and aligning coordination. Meetings focus on reviews and readouts rather than making decisions and getting work done. Because of an illusory notion of accountability, everyone's focus is on the upwards chain towards the minister, rather than joining horizontally or looking outwards towards the citizen. The solution has to start with small, multidisciplinary, multi-departmental teams with dedicated, full-time leaders. Empower the team to make decisions and hold the leader accountable for results. Don't forget to include the relevant agency. Often the centre removes these agencies to arm's length to avoid its temptation to meddle, but then finds itself cut off from real domain experience. Include civil society organisations and real users. Minimise submit and await approval. Instead, invite the minister to attend the team meetings. Most importantly, keep this team together all the way from strategy through policy to deliver and learn. Government expense controls generally don't extend to pizzas, but if they did, Amazon's 2-pizza rule would be a good one here. The government's current move to organise around missions is promising, but I worry it will get bogged down in the silos of the organisation structure and cumbersome coordination. Trust the small, empowered team to deliver. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever does. Second, we must reverse the extreme centralisation of UK government. I saw this also at MHCLG, where each incoming new minister would introduce their own pet pot of money to be bid for by councils. During my short time there, we had the Towns Fund, the Future High Street Fund, the Local Digital Fund, the Community Renewal Fund, the Pocket Parks Fund, the Levelling Up Fund, the Shared Prosperity Fund. We even had the Chewing Gum Litter Fund. In some local councils, the only department which was properly resourced was the bidding team. And now it goes on. We have the reductio ad absurdum of pay for pothole performance. Going back to rough sleeping, I remember sitting in, I'm sorry to them, but I was sitting in a surreal meeting of officials in Marsham Street, poring over a large spreadsheet to decide unit by unit whether to purchase, for example, a flat above a chip shop in Tandridge, a district apparently unfamiliar to anyone present in the meeting. By drawing these micro decisions to the centre, we have degraded our local government, hollowed out its capacity, so that ergo we can't trust them. This not only debilitates the local tier, but it clogs up the central one. But worse still, it makes everything slower and more expensive. Why could the mayor of Madrid campaign on adding 56 kilometres of new metro and deliver it inside their 4-year term? Because of their powers to raise local taxes, pass laws, and make the necessary approvals. City transport will never be a top 5 issue in a national election, and so it doesn't get funding or focus. So build the local tier, especially by deepening devolution to big cities, but make sure that pays for itself by radically streamlining and simplifying central government to do what only it can and should do. And third, we must imagine the new model of digital era government. So I would guess that the application of agentic AI in government could lead to productivity improvements of at least 20 to 30%, and also make government faster, more accessible, and more transparent. But this moment allows us to imagine new organisational models which are implied by my earlier points. Rather than government being siloed around departments and agencies and on separate central and local levels, it could be inherently more networked. Common data sets and common components linked by a network of rules and APIs can transform services into seamless journeys. Government services do differ greatly, so we should avoid reimposing monolithic or monopolistic structures, but they can share common infrastructure. This will require changed ways of working with agile development teams against real user needs. The organisational and cultural distance between policy and design can be shortened. Indeed, policy is design. It's about testing solutions with stakeholders, learning, and getting something into production fast. Most successful corporates already operate in this way. And it's not a fantasy. India built the Aadhaar digital ID system with a team of just 100 people for a population of 1.4 billion. Compliance, accountability, and evaluation can be designed in rather than absorbing so much separate effort and time. There will be important debates as to what parts of this need to be in public ownership and what is done by large private sector tech giants. But for the civil service, this will mean not only a smaller headcount, but a very different skill set. We need designers, product managers, engineers, data scientists, and citizen insight specialists. I'm quite confident that government can win this war for talent if it articulates the opportunity. Would a young technology graduate prefer fine-tuning ad placement at Facebook or tackling the most important societal challenges? So, these three themes, reshaping around complex challenges, embracing radical decentralization, and adopting digital era methods, are coherent and reinforcing. Together, I think they point the way to a vision for a government which is closer to citizens and shaping solutions to their priorities. For those in government, I hope this vision can be ambitious but uplifting and energising. Hard rain is ultimately a less effective motivation than a glimpse of sunshine. But a vision is only of use with a serious change programme attached. And we need to return to that observation that previous programmes have underdelivered. Transformation programmes are hard. I've been involved in dozens of them. Those that succeed have, as well as a vision, 3 other critical conditions for success. First, any transformation programme needs a sense of priority and urgency. This, in the past, has been lacking. There are not many votes in transforming government. New prime ministers, and I've seen 5 of them, arrive with their already crowded agenda, realise that the system of government is unfit, but are tempted to try their best to make it work rather than expend energy on an upheaval from which only their successors will benefit. And so it goes on. But this government is making some of the right noises. We will see. Next, a transformation programme needs exceptional leadership. A united top team comprising power, expertise, and credibility. Here I am, frankly, unconvinced. Part of the solution may lie in the idea, supported by both Lord Maud and Simon Case, to split the role of Cabinet Secretary and appoint a full-time Chief Executive of the Civil Service. I agree, but I think even that will be insufficient. We need to enlist more insider, outsider leaders, people with knowledge of the system, but experience of what good looks like elsewhere. And last, we need an army of supporters. Large-scale change only happens when many answer the call to arms. A change programme is a movement, and that's where we come in. We who cared enough to show up in this room today, who are listening to this speech online. It's why I felt the need to engage in public service myself. For those of us who care, for those of us who can, who have some of what this movement needs, serve. I can tell you from my experience that public service can be hard, but it'll be a period in your life when you can truly make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Michael, thanks so much. That was absolutely fascinating. And I want to dive into questions to you straight away, but I'm going to resist that urge and come to our panel first. Jeremy, I'm interested in hearing your reflections. How far what Michael outlined chimes with what you learnt about how to transform government from your time in office? And I'd be particularly interested in any reflections you have on Michael's point about the importance of spreading power and moving away from the centralisation of our system.
Well, first, thank you for inviting me along. And the last time I was doing a joint gig with Michael, we were being grilled by a select committee, and this definitely feels like progress. So thank you for that. And I think Michael had provided a great deal of wisdom in the Cabinet Office board, and you've heard a lot of that today. There's also frustrations, and I can see that Michael's got the frustration in his voice as well, when he lists the uncontroversial areas that we need to see changed. And as you rightly said, that's not a criticism of civil servants. There are many, many excellent civil servants. I had the huge privilege of being albeit on secondment, a civil servant for a short period of time, long before I entered into a ministerial office, and that gave me a perspective. I know that there are brilliant people out there, one of whom worked with me is in the second row. I just embarrassed them completely, who have got who really want to see that change, and the 20 to 30% change in productivity. There are there's nobody who's more keen to see that change than excellent people inside the civil service who want to see it happen. But the frustration that Michael referred to, and I think, Alex, I pillaged your list, I think it's an IFG list, but closed culture, the cult of generalists over specialists, churn, poor quality and poor use of data, policy versus implementation, and I would agree that part of our subset is cross-departmental working, aversion to innovation and poor performance management. So we all know these issues. As Michael says, they're the same issues that were talked about by Fulton in 1968. And his words always haunt me, the comment he made that I've come across no instance in which reform has been progressed too swiftly, which sums up the problem that we are still dealing with. And Michael is right in saying that when does this get grasped? Given that we know the issues, given that there is a desire to change, when is it going to happen? And that, I'm afraid, lies in the hands of politicians. It is the moment when you grasp it and accept disruption. And that's what Michael was alluding to. I was excited to receive Francis Moore's report when I was MCO in the summer of 2023, which is not to say that it was a perfect blueprint, but it's a hugely important step forward and a great source of debate, I thought. But if you saw the public announcement of his report, it was very clear, for very understandable reasons, that was sort of heading into the sand. I think the statement said, well, given the 5 priorities of the government, we're not going to do anything to distract from that, perfectly understandably, though perhaps a lost opportunity, because if at the end of a governmental, didn't know it was the end then, but if after 12 years you're saying, we can do better than this, government's important, the way we do government's important, I think that's a very positive message. Likewise, I totally understand Michael's point that when you are new to government, having been out for 14 years or however long it is, to say, OK, we're going to go through disruption is a problem. I appreciate that, but at some stage we're going to have to grasp this, and I can go through how, but I suspect we're going to get onto that later on in our discussion.
Indeed. Thank you, Jeremy. Josie, one of the kind of linchpins of Michael's speech was the need to embrace digital government. And there is, of course, constant talk at the moment about the potential public sector savings and productivity gains from tech, from AI adoption. Can you tell us a bit more about what digital government actually means for ways of working, for capability and talent, and how ready is government to make the most of that opportunity?
Great. Thanks again. Thanks for having me. I think digital government is just good, modern government in the same way that kind of digital shopping is just good, modern shopping, right? It's the same thing. But it feels to me that we are at a moment, which is that AI is going to change everything. And if you believe that AI is going to change everything and that we are at a kind of internet moment of disruption, then the question for all of us in all of our organisations is, are we stepping up to the scale of the opportunity and challenge that brings? And I think that is the challenge for all of us, including government. Now, I think DCIT are doing brilliantly against that challenge because, and I think what we're seeing is real alignment from politicians, right from the PM through the Secretary of State. You've got brilliant civil servants. You've got NEDs really leaning in to support the effort. And it seems to me what they've been given is kind of permission for ambition. They have been bestowed upon them has been, you are the centre of government to drive this change. And driving that change they are, and of course it's hard, but change is happening, and I think that's brilliant as a citizen. I'm very excited for that. In terms of what next, I think there is a sort of top-down thing and a bottom-up thing. So the top-down thing is, I agree with Michael, AI, particularly agentic AI, could transform radically some of the customer-facing parts of government. And here's the opportunity to do the thing that he suggests, which is to leapfrog, to go from a real legacy system to really, start again and completely transform our customer experience. And those are the things that I would absolutely prioritise, and our digital specialists, and they're very precious. There aren't enough of them. Not by the way, in any organisation or any sector, but in government particularly precious. I would prioritise their efforts there. And then the bottom-up thing, I think, is about people who are not digital specialists, because that's everybody. Because I know the Prime Minister has said he wants 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 people in the civil service to be digital specialists, but what about everybody else? We are all going to need to understand how to use this technology in our day-to-day working and our day-to-day lives. And so, you know, if what we want is AI in every task, every day, for everybody, and I think that should be our ambition, we've got a lot of work to do on skills and culture and tooling and mindsets and all of those kinds of things to get the rest of the civil service making the very most of the tools that are available.
Thank you, Josie. Alex, Michael, Josie, Jeremy have all referenced the current government's reform plans. You know, Michael's making this speech in the context of a government that has put state reform right at the heart of their message, and they're under a lot of pressure to show that they are not just the status quo. Do you think that the plans that have been outlined by the Prime Minister and others in this government so far are sufficient to meet the scale of the challenge that our panellists and that Michael so far have outlined?
Yeah, marks out of 10. I'll resist that. Thanks, Emma. I mean, I think it goes to the point that Michael made about new prime ministers, really, which is I think the intent is there and the intent is good. I think the provocative challenge, perhaps some of the language was a bit much for some in the civil service about tepid baths and so on, but actually the language of challenge and trying to set up a bit of a challenge for the civil service to step up is right. I think the plan for change, I think the approach around missions is good. But I think the test, and like so many things that we're going to say over the next couple of months, the test about the kind of reality of it will come with the spending review in June, and how budgets are really aligned to this, and whether we're promised a workforce plan as part of the spending review, is that really embedded in the objectives of the government? So I'm sort of setting the spending review up as a bit of a kind of a waymarker and a test there. In terms of concerns, and these are less about some of them are about the current government and some of them are more general questions. I'll make a few quick points. The first is, I think you talk to ministers, special advisors, civil servants at the moment, and I'm worried that there is a mutual frustration that good people aren't really talking to each other about reform in the most effective possible way. The civil servants are saying we need more direction from ministers, we want policy ideas. Ministers are saying, well, hang on, where's the creativity in the civil service, where's the dynamism, where's the energy, where's the speed? And I worry a little bit that good people are not talking to each other in the most constructive way possible around reform. So I think there's a challenge and a question there, and a need to build on the announcements that the government's made to develop a real shared plan around this, picking up on many of the points that Michael's made. Secondly, and this speaks to what Jeremy and Michael were saying, is there is a natural and perfectly kind of reasonable tendency, particularly amongst the civil service, I know I did it myself, to try and appreciate the complexity of some of these problems, and to point out that one reform links to another, links to another, links to another, and to Jeremy or Fulton's point that you've never seen reform done too quickly. I think there is a danger that because of the complexity of government and the difficulty of some of these issues, we spend too long, and the government spends too long admiring the problem rather than ripping off some sticking plasters. So I think there's a question there, and Jeremy sets the Fulton test rightly. And thirdly, I think building on Michael's point about good leadership, but I think good leaders are essential. But I also, and again, I feel this having sort of stepped out of the civil service, those leaders need to be operating in a system that gives them the right incentives to get on with all of this stuff. And I think that goes to some of the points around accountability that Francis Maud raised. So yes, exceptional leadership, yes, supporters, but the system also needs to be setting the right incentives. And we've come up with various ideas around, external boards that hold the head of the civil service to account for actually maintaining and improving the capability of the civil service. I think there's a big question about how accounting officers work to some of your kind of complex challenges and cross-departmental problems. Is the accounting officer model still right for the nature of 21st century policy problems? Is the government really grappling with those? Well, I hope they are, but I'd be a bit surprised if we get all the answers in the spending review.
Thanks, Alex. Michael, I want to come back to you now, and to a point that you've made and that Jeremy made as well with reference to Fulton. These are familiar themes when it comes to reform. We've seen the same themes, the same recommendations returning time and again. What's your assessment of why reform has failed to stick so many times in the past, and what kind of precisely do you think needs to be done differently this time to ensure it really does make a difference?
There's a very simple answer to that, and Alex has kind of touched on it, which is that transformation doesn't happen in government because it's not in anyone's interest to get it done. It's not in the interests of politicians to distract from the manifesto and the agenda they were elected on to undertake a very complex programme and distracting and potentially risky programme of transformation of government. And it's not either in the incentive of officials to distract from their agenda either. So the reward simply isn't there to take the necessary degree of risk and effort to make it happen. I think those conditions are more likely to apply at the beginning of a government, and you need, therefore, a prime minister who takes the view that actually this is their responsibility. And I think we may see that. Time will tell. I think we're also at a moment now where we can look at international examples and see that the failures of government to deliver to agenda not only risks that agenda, but actually risks their legitimacy and indeed the very nature of democracy. And therefore, I think there is a growing realization that this matter is becoming urgent and critical. So maybe we'll see some change this time. I do think that the idea of establishing some cross-party consensus about this being a multi-party parliamentary agenda and a shared national mission to modernise government is important because it won't be complete within a single parliamentary term. And the idea of enshrining that in either some statute or some parliamentary body, or Francis Maude's idea was that Gisela Stewart, who's sitting here, and myself would do it together. But however that's to happen, the idea of having some independent oversight which holds government to that agenda is also attractive.
Yeah. One of the themes that has come out really strongly in almost everything that everyone has said is the theme of people, whether that's around who is leading reform efforts, what these kind of proposals mean for non-digital people as much as digital. Alex, your point that good people aren't necessarily talking to each other about reform at the moment. Josie, on the subject of people, in the past, sometimes reformers have made the mistake of not bringing the workforce along with them. What do you make of the way that leaders in government have handled bringing the workforce with them so far? And are you hopeful that this time it will happen in a joined up, collaborative way?
I think what any transformation needs in order to get going, as Michael says, is vision and leadership and people feeling part of that journey. And I think that in the articulation of the missions, I think many civil servants, probably most civil servants, can get excited about that, I don't think you have to scratch a civil servant or public servant but you don't have to go very deep to get a sense of purpose and, why people do the jobs they do. And I think there is a real opportunity with this reform to really tap into that and have a common purpose around the missions and a common purpose around the thing that unites all the politicians and the civil servants and the public servants and indeed the public. And as part of that, I think there is something about tapping into the absolute brilliance of many, many civil servants, up and down the country, not just in central government, but out there delivering as well. And I think sometimes we forget that public servants and civil servants out there have a lot of the solutions already, and they are already struggling against the system. And actually what they need is someone to help. So I guess the second point I'd make is just about what the centre can do, or the leadership can do, to unblock some of those things that are just in the way. I was talking to somebody who's ex-Google the other day who's telling me about their bureaucracy buster program. So every year or every 6 months, people just emailed in and said, can you just fix this? And it is pretty tactical stuff. It's like, I just need, so if you're working on a mission, I just need a pass that gets me into this building and this building. I just need my Teams to work with your Google thing so that I can share documents effectively. I just need, it's those I just need that feel so frustrating that actually if somebody could just make it their job to kind of get those blockers out of the way, it feels to me, I'm getting nods. I feel like this is, I'm giving voice to frustration in the room, but I feel like if we could solve for some of those really practical, day-to-day things that are getting in the way, you could really unleash some brilliant ideas as well.
Jeremy, I want to pick up on this point and bring it to you. So, if part of leadership is about unblocking the things that are getting in the way of reform, what do you see the role of ministers being there? What is the role of ministers in reforming the state, particularly in the context that JC's described?
Well, a brief moment on ministers, but I'd like to pick up on both what Michael and JC are saying. And look, we all know, and there are other ministers, support ministers in the room, and the issues. I mean, ministers aren't trained before they arrive to do their posts. We introduced in 2019 training for ministers. I then went to become Minister of Defence Procurement with an awful lot of 120 billion budget and so on, and felt morally obliged to go and do the training. Now, I didn't have enough time to do anything like the focus that I wanted to do on it. We should be training people long before they become ministers. Why isn't the PAC trained on how you do major government programmes? That would make for better inquirers. Why aren't we training PPSs and the like, or even the opposition before they become ministers? So there's ways we can make that better, so enable ministers to have a flying start. And then length of time in post. Francis Moore was in post for 5 years. I was lucky enough to be in post for 3 years, nearly 3 years in the MOD, but actually another point was that the team was consistent. So I was there with Ben Wallace and James Heapy, and that helped continuity. And it's not because people say that's because you suggest the civil servants are going behind your backs or trying to undermine you. Not really, but given the amount of, not at all in fact, but given the churn and generalists versus specialists, if you're in post as a minister for 2.5, 3 years, you actually become the specialist in some of these subjects and the source of institutional memory. It shouldn't be that way around, but given the way the system works, it does. But taking the point, so that's within departments, taking it on a cross-reform basis. If we say those are the problems encountered by ministers in a department, who is it who's going to pull the levers to actually make major reform, really major reform happen at the centre? An issue which, as Michael pointed out, is never going to be in the top 5 of polling responses. Those who are interested in civil service reform are quite odd, and most of us are in this room. That's just the reality of where we are. It's never going to be a catchy thing. So is it the Prime Minister as Minister for the Civil Service? Well, he or she's got a lot to do. The Cabinet Secretary, likewise. If you're MCO or CDL, there is enough coordinating government and handling crises to be able to, too much to be able to really devote your time. So I think that the answers are staring us in the face, that you do need a stronger centre. Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, they all have that stronger centre office for the Prime Minister, enabling you to really direct government, and that's just reflecting reality. Now, Macmillan would palm off questions in PMQs. That's for the Secretary of State for Defence or for the Housing Minister to respond. He wouldn't do it. That's not how government works now. And people look for accountability in a far more presidential-style system to the centre, and that should be reflected in our structures. And on the point which Josie raised, excellent point about just fix this. Well, we're not Google. We have who would people be emailing to say just fix this? So there is also a role for a bolstered centre of the civil service, actually focused, probably under an individual, focused on the capabilities and improving productivity. Certainly a role for an enhanced role for the Civil Service Commission, better resourced with a broader remit, in my view, and a Civil Service Board, and I think better use of the functions that are cross-government. They're there with implementation rather than necessarily a policy focus, and I think if we could develop those two axes, Office for the Prime Minister and a deeper focus one-stop shop for how we're going to look at the whole of the civil service, including in its decentralised forms and devolved forms, then that would be, I think, two ways of actually helping to achieve change.
Thank you, Jeremy. Right, you've waited long enough. I'm going to come out to the audience now. I'm going to take questions in groups of 3. Can I ask you to say your name, which organisation you're from, and can I ask you to make it a question rather than a statement, just because we are running a little short of time? I've got one here, and then one here.
Thank you. John Penrose, one of the former ministers in the room that Jeremy was just mentioning. I'm loving the conversation so far. I want to pick up on Michael's excellent three points he made right at the start of his speech and focus on the first one about the empowered, accountable, multidisciplinary teams. Huge cultural change within government implied in that sentence. And so perhaps how would you handle it when the rubber hits the road? You know, it's inevitable that some of them are going to fail, of those teams. What happens when some of them do? Who ministers, permanent secretaries, who deals with that, and what should they do for both the people in that team that's just failed and for the problem which the team was designed to address?
Thank you very much. I've got one here.
Thank you. Andrew Haldenby from the Effective Governance Forum. Thank you so much for today. And, you know, I'm sure I speak for all of us, Michael, that we're part of the Michael Jary army of supporters. And how many of us are there here? 50 people here, 500,000 civil servants. I'm sure we can, 50 versus 500,000, we can do it. So question for Michael and a question for Jeremy. Michael, I believe you when you say you want a total transformation. And, you know, I think you were sort of quite... you didn't spell it out in detail, but a radical decentralisation, an improvement in productivity by 30%. You know, this is potentially shrinking in the size of central government on a historic scale. So this is a big deal, and it's something I would support. Can I just encourage you to say a little bit more about what you described as insider, outsider leadership? Because it seems to me that we will need outsider leadership to deliver a scale of this change, which is so different to recent experience. And then to Jeremy, I'm not a reform voter in any way and ever will be, but do we need non-traditional, different political leadership to lead this kind of change?
Thank you very much. And then we had one here.
Thank you. Yeah, Bernard Casey, a retired academic, ex-OECD economist, and one or two other things. I was interested in the question of complete rewiring. Because we experience that. That's actually, and my point is that this discussion has gone on at a very high level. It's talked about central government. People's interactions are with things, not just with the NHS, but their local doctor or their local hospital. People's interactions are with things like possibly HMRC or the DWP, rather than with government, or their interactions are with their local city hall. Yep. And it is there that the total rewiring in practice, as much as anything else, is the problem. In fact, the experience is that very much has been wired, but actually the more wiring there is, the less communication there is. And the explanations that you get when you ask for what is wrong is, the system tells me. It works like this. This is what the system says. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, so we've got questions on multidisciplinary teams, insider and outsider leadership, whether we need different forms of political leadership, and what rewiring means for services that are much closer to people's lives. I also wanted to throw in an online question, which is specifically for you, Michael, on the role of NEDs, of non-executive directors, in the transformation agenda. Michael, I'm going to come to you first.
Okay, that's a long list of questions, but...
You don't have to answer every one. You can pick your favourites. Let
me just say something about the team, multidisciplinary empowered teams. Thank you, John, for your question. The concern is, I think, firstly, that we need to allow those teams to fail within their objective, and actually government and ultimately the media and citizens must be more tolerant around seeing government fail as long as they can be persuaded that actually we're doing so in the interests of learning and improving. And therefore that failing must be fast cycle. We don't want the kind of failure that large monolithic programs, and we can all think of examples, ends up being discovered 10 years later to have been built on false principles. But we are going to see experimentation which gives us learning, but which results in a restart. And teams need to be empowered to do that. The other thing about small multi-powered teams is the concern is that leads to anarchy. I've got all these teams running around making decisions, and we'll have chaos. So there do need to be guardrails, and those guardrails are around strategy, which is where ministers should really be setting their picture of what they want the goal and the end state to be, and the teams need to then perform within a degree of both, architectural compliance with only having one version of the truth, only holding data in one place. If you've got a unique source of data, making it available to everyone else. So those basic sort of technological principles, but also fitting in with ultimately the strategy which is determined by ministers. I hope that goes some way to answering your question. Let me just touch on the role of NED, since I'm probably qualified to do that. I think first of all to say, I think non-executives, which as far as I know are an innovation, unique innovation in British government, I think are a very enlightened innovation. And I think they have demonstrated their value. The experience is universal that they are extremely dependent on the willingness of the relevant minister or secretary of state to use them meaningfully or not. And it's very difficult to change that. Some will and some won't, and I think in some degree that's a fact of life. Where I think the role of boards and ministers could be significantly enhanced is actually chilling out about this artificial separation between strategy and delivery. The current belief is in government that non-executive directors, because they lack democratic accountability, should not involve themselves in strategy. They need to confine themselves to matters of delivery. The truth is that very many government failures are baked in at the strategy stage, and by the time you get to delivery, it's too late to. You're in an uncovering phase, but it's too late to do much about it. And I think the experience of non-executive directors is therefore being constrained in government by not being able to advise and offer suggestion at the strategy phase on the policy stage, albeit that. I don't think that undermines accountability at all, because ministers will have the ultimate say.
Thanks, Michael. Josie, I want to come to you now, and I wonder if you could particularly talk to the question on multidisciplinary teams.
I agree with everything Michael says about failure and making sure we're failing forward, although I think we need to change our language around failure, because I'm not sure it's failing if you're testing and learning and improving.
Absolutely.
And so I think we should not talk about it like that, and we should help frame the conversation as something that all of us do in our everyday lives and is commonplace in other industries. Francis Maud had this brilliant idea. I don't know if it was actually ever implemented, but he had this brilliant idea for an award for failure, because he wanted to celebrate people who had fantastic ideas and for whatever reason it hadn't worked out. And I think that is something to be encouraged. And I think the other thing to take from that is, how do we change the incentives? And how do we use the culture? How do we change some things to change the culture to enable this testing and learning and growing and innovating to go on? I wanted to just say a couple of other things on those questions. One on the insider-outsider question. One of the things I would love government to get better at is letting the outside in. I heard this fantastic quote from somebody who had joined the civil service from outside, who said, all the doors open from the inside. And I guess my encouragement is, if you are on the inside, open the door. because there is so much expertise and insight out there that you can let in and open the door, walk through it. One of the things that I would again love to see civil servants do is spend less time in the office and more time out of the office, out there where users are, where, to this gent's point, where job centres are and city halls are and NHS trusts are, even if they are not in their department, because of course we know that there's a complex web of things of how delivery actually happens. And then last quick point, on training for the political classes, big thumbs up for that. I mean, it seems to me that in any other industry, in any other world, if you were going to do a high pressure, high impact, a high profile role, somebody would have given you some help before, during, probably after. And it feels to me like there is a lot of work to be done to support the political classes, because of course we all need them to be brilliant at their jobs.
Just to endorse that point, I have to mention the Institute for Government Academy, which is there precisely to try and take on some of that challenge, to look at how you provide really meaningful development opportunities.
It's a cultural thing as well, though, isn't it? Right. So I think it's quite hard for ministers to sort of say they're going on training.
Absolutely.
There's this sort of weird cultural thing that we have, that they must already be the finished product. And again, we would never say that of anybody else in any other industry who's at the top of their game. Sorry, no, I 100% agree. Jeremy, I want to ask you specifically about the point on whether we need different kinds of political leadership in this moment.
Can I be naughty and do my cross-departmental teams as well, Emma?
Of course you can.
Because it's a brilliant question from John, and I get but we just got to set these things up for success. And we know it does work, can work, so it works in a crisis. Now, having chaired meetings in a crisis, everyone gets together. You know that the Prime Minister's focused on it, the Treasury aren't blinking about money, and things happen, and it can work. And so I think to get that working better and interdepartmental teams, you do need to have, as I mentioned earlier, that central direction which enables you to have the proper prioritisation from number 10 and the budget to support it from HMT. And then when you're setting up these teams, I used to have conversations with people, well, how many, it would all be around how many DGs, how many people are we going to need? Right, this is the budget. So this is, in the private sector, this is the market opportunity, this is the potential benefit, this is the budget we've put. So, and then people have got to be more, give people the flexibility to work out what proportion of that is going to go on data support and digital, and it becomes much more focused on the outcomes. And then absolutely on failure. There's a Minister for Procurement, Defence Procurement, you know in your vast organisation that something's going wrong somewhere. The question is, can you find out before anybody else can? And I would constantly, I wasn't aware of Francis's reward for failure, or presentation for failure, because it's not failure, but I was always asking my SROs, please, can one of you just turn up and say, look, I don't think this thing's going to work. Of course, it was cutting edge and forward-leaning, and we've learned a lot from it, but we're not going to reach the outcome. Let's cut it and put the money elsewhere. And on that point, because the system is not good at putting their hands up and saying, actually, this isn't going to work, although quite often ministers will be delighted, and they'll say, OK, that's not going to work. We'll put money behind another plan that will. The evaluation team, the evaluation unit, I think is incredibly important, and I think that does need to be supported. There's a registry that was supporting it. On the traditional leadership, I'm going to be very naughty and ask what you mean by traditional, non-traditional leadership. I mean, I think there are.
I suppose I mean populism and the fact that whether we like it or not, politicians who are expressing genuine public discontent about the state of government are
Okay.
politicians like Nigel Farage rather than politicians like Keir Starmer and anything.
Well, the benefit, as Michael said, of public service is you can actually get things done. And there are lots of people in the political world who want to actually drive reform and can see that actually changing the plumbing is a really positive thing to do and can be presented as a really positive thing to do. And you're right that we need to get it sorted for the reasons you state. There's never been a more important time in peacetime for us actually to say, this is how we're changing the plumbing to make certain it works, and we're delivering for the people in the same way that the gentleman was saying about people's interaction with public services. Life's moved on, and people are expecting so much from the way they interact with private sector companies that if we're still maintaining the modus operandi we had 20 years ago, it won't work. So to your point, sir, I think we Michael's a case in point. The non-traditional leadership I think we need to bring in is we do need to be open to that outside influence. We do need to bring people in into politics possibly, or just bring them into the system as non-execs, as in a bolstered civil service commission with more people coming from the outside. And I think that outside influence can help support a transformation.
Thank you, Jeremy. Alex, I want to come to you on an audience question from online. Do you agree that meaningful reform of our over-centralised state has to begin with loosening the Treasury's grip?
Loosening the Treasury's grip, a big one. Just on the previous round, in 10 seconds, on NEDs, I couldn't resist saying, generally individual NEDs, great, generally boards, rubbish. So I think the system set up that we got some really brilliant people in, but the structure around the boards didn't really work. And on John's point, just to pick up on failure, I think the government's really bad at communicating failure. It goes a bit to Josie on language, because if you embed a proper sort of, a good comms strategy at the start of the project, then you present failure in a different way, and so it's not uncontrolled. But so just to get those off my chest, Treasury, loosening the grip of the Treasury. Well, I mean, we argued in the work we did on the centre that the critical thing wasn't that the Treasury was sort of doing bad work. It's that in the absence of a really clear strategy and direction from the centre of government, the Treasury steps in and through spending reviews and budgets and everything else sets its sets strategy on its own terms. It is a powerful and highly effective department. I don't think we should be arguing to make the Treasury less effective. I do think we need to harness the authority power of the Treasury so that, yes, of course, it says no when it has to say no, but that it is geared towards the objectives of the government, which requires the government clearly to have clear objectives, but also goes to the point I kind of hinted at a bit earlier around accounting officers and the alignment of the control mechanisms that the Treasury uses work for the Treasury. I'm not sure they always work for the whole government collectively. So yeah, harness and align the Treasury and not split it up or loosen it quite.
Can I just comment on that? I fully agree. I think the Treasury sometimes gets a bad rap. I mean, you hear the criticism that they're short-termist, that they disallow spend to save proposals, but they're the finance department. I mean, what do you expect? That is what the finance department job is. The problem is there isn't, as you would find in most organisations, a counterbalancing strategy function which is pushing for change and advocating the vision, and then the constructive tension between the two. And therefore the Treasury's voice is over-dominant. It is true that sometimes dealing with them is a bit like dealing with your bank manager rather than dealing with an equity investor. That is partly true. And so I'm not saying that there's no need for reform, but I actually think it's because the strategic centre of government is far too weak.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mike. I would love to come out for another round of questions, but we're not going to have time. Instead, I'm going to ask everybody to answer one last question from online as we close. If you had one specific piece of advice on how to make this reform agenda stick, what would it be for the current government? Consider it your closing remarks. Who wants to go first? Mike, I'm going to come to you last, so you can close the event. So,
Emma's looking
I'm
at
going
me.
to look at you.
I think the role of being the IFG person on the panel is
Exactly.
to give everyone else thinking time, so I'll talk. So, now, I think everything we talked about is important. I think there are loads of things you can do, but I think it comes to the point that all the rest of the panel made in their different ways about why this stuff doesn't stick. And I think it doesn't stick because, as Michael said, it's in no one's interests, political or civil service, to really make some of these changes. So I would make, however you do it, we've made various recommendations, you can read them on the website, but I would really put this on the, a minister, whoever that is, Francis Moore type figure, and the head of the civil service and the cabinet secretary, again, however that is configured, and make sure they are being held accountable by an external force, whether that's a board or something else, for the capability and the continued improved performance of the civil service and the sort of mechanics of the state.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alex. Tracy, I'm going to come to you now.
I think I would go big as you can possibly go on missions and mission-driven government. I think in its conception, it is such a fantastic rallying cry for how government can be done differently and better and more innovatively. So yeah, I would double down behind that.
Brilliant. Thank you. Jeremy.
Agree, Josie, that missions are all kinds of advantages. So there you've got, hopefully from a strengthened centre, a clear sense of purpose and a clear direction of travel. But I don't think that will be sufficient, and I know Josie probably doesn't think it either. The hardest thing in government is to find time, and to find time to actually work through fundamental changes that are required. So I think putting missions at the heart is absolutely right, but I still think they need to be backed up by structural changes that enable the centre to really direct and to have someone who's answering the email question that Josie mentioned from Google as to who is actually responsible day in, day out to working through how we enhance our capabilities, improve performance and drive productivity across the civil service, and who is the challenger to make certain that that is happening, and are they properly equipped to do that task. So that is, find the time to work that answer out.
Thank you. Michael.
And I would say, while agreeing with all of the above, seize this moment. I think this is a unique moment where you have the combination of circumstances of a government with a majority and at the start of its parliamentary term, a public realisation that things are not working and change is necessary, a warning from some overseas experience which shows you what happens when public loses faith in government or when change is poorly and carelessly applied, and the circumstances of the availability of technology which allows you to imagine a changed organisation and a much more efficient organisation structure and much closer to citizens. And think we can't miss this moment. Those four things coinciding, it says that this is the time when, despite all the difficulties we've spoken about and all the reasons why this is a long haul, it has to be seized.
Thank you, Michael. Unfortunately, that's all we've got time to. I'm going to have to draw it to a close now. Do have a look at our website for some other excellent events and reports that we have coming. I should flag a great event we have next week on what the government can learn from universal credit, which will touch, I think, on some of the topics we've discussed today. On Monday the 12th, we've got a particularly special event on rewiring the state, where we're going to be hearing reflections from the chair of the Institute for Government, Lord Sainsbury of Turville, before he steps down from that role this summer. So please do join us for that as well. Huge thanks to our audience, both in person, online, and enormous thanks to our brilliant panel, and especially to Michael for a fascinating discussion. Thank you.